Welcome to the Today's Leader podcast. Building tomorrow's best leaders, today.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul, I see you. All right, Charlie. Finish on. Coach Cole.
Great job, guys.
Hey there, it's Coach Cole here, and welcome to episode 430 of the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Now, the world in many ways today seems both larger and smaller than ever before because of obviously the recent years of turmoil brought about by the response of COVID. Now, travel seems harder. International expansion seems harder, yet we can be meeting and training with leaders in other countries through online connections at any time. International organizations do this on a daily basis, and today we discuss doing business globally and how to develop cross-cultural skills as a leader with a true global expert. Now meet Dr. Rajesh Kumar. Now, as a CEO and founder of Global Strategic Advisory, he helps international brands navigate cross-cultural differences and avoid multi-million-dollar expansion mistakes. So originally from India, Dr. Kumar has lived and worked in the United States, France, Finland, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Denmark, and the United Kingdom. I think he knows what he's talking about when it comes to cross-cultural leadership. He's taught at Penn State, Ohio State, Babson College, and Menlo College in the United States, the University of Nottingham in the UK, and the University of Aarhus in Denmark, amongst many others. He's an expert in international business strategy and cross-cultural management, who has published dozens of books, articles, co-edited several book volumes, and took part in more than 60 conference presentations globally. He shares in our conversation today how to develop cross-cultural skills as a leader, how to build trust, maintain trust with employees and customers, plus provide specific examples of companies that made multi-billion-dollar mistakes by failing to understand the market culture. It is a fascinating conversation and absolutely relevant for you as a leader today. So you will certainly not regret tuning in. So after a word from our sponsor, please welcome Dr. Rajesh Kumar to the podcast.
The podcast is brought to you by Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome Dr. Rajesh Kumar. How are you, Rajesh?
I'm good. How are you doing, Tony?
I'm very, very well. Now, you're in Philadelphia, as we just found out, and
Correct.
you're part of. You're still in yesterday. I'm in today. So
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Share with the audience. Now, you're known as a cross-cultural expert, a global expert in leadership. So, share a little bit about your story, Dr. Kumar.
Right. So originally I'm from India, but I've been out of the country for 35 years. I went to England in the mid-70s, then moved to the US where I studied and got my PhD, and I specialized in global business. And so actually I taught in the United States. I've actually also taught in 7 or 8 European countries. My last assignment was in New Zealand in 2019. And I also had an opportunity to accept a position in Australia in the mid-90s.
Okay.
Or Singapore. That did not happen, but certainly the possibility was there. So, based both on my professional experience, my practical lived experience in 8 or 9 different cultures or countries, my conversations with a wide variety of people, from business managers to students to people who have lived and traveled across different countries, I came to realize that this is indeed extremely important, and certainly for global business and for people trying to navigate cultural boundaries, whether they are in terms, whether they're trying to negotiate deals, whether they're trying to manage operations. And, anecdotally, as well as stories otherwise, tell you that a number of companies and individuals don't really do a very good job in terms of trying to bridge the difference. And so what we are saying is we're talking about bridging the differences. And I think it's an issue that is dominant at different levels, even in the global discourse today. And I know Australia and China have been having issues. Same is also true with India and China, right? And both at a political level, yes, definitely. But I think, the cultural element is also there, because even politics are to some extent shaped by culture. But my focus here is basically on the business aspect of things. When a company is going to do business in China, or say a Chinese company is coming to do business in Australia, or an American company is doing business in Australia, or vice versa. And so, there are differences, and you've got to really understand what those differences are and how to bridge them.
Yeah, fully agree. I have a number of clients that do business, as in individual leaders that I coach that do business. One does business a lot in Malaysia, because that's where a lot of their engineering and manufacturing plants are. But previously, leaders that I've worked with have spent a lot of time working with their counterparts in India, for example, and Indonesia. And then a really good friend in my network is the chairman of the board of a Papua New Guinea company. It's interesting that while we all believe we have a very good basis of leadership and being able to work through people, there are those cultural differences or those cultural challenges that we face in each and every one of those, the examples that I've just shared. So what is it that a leader can do, or an organisation can do, to help prepare their leaders if they are navigating business abroad or in other countries? What are some of the steps that you recommend?
There are a number of things that they can do. So if you take a look, say, I'll give you the example, say, of General Motors, which was there in India for about 21 years. And they exited India because they did not make money and they lost money. And the problem was that they sent 9 managers to manage their operations in India over a period of 21 years. Which means that each manager just had a turnover of slightly over 2 years. That is not a long time to really understand a culture. It takes 6 months to get into it, and the last 6 months you're really preparing to get out of it. Yes? So you just basically have a year or so, and that's not sufficient by any stretch of the imagination. And if you compare that with Japanese or Korean or other Asian companies, historically when they've sent managers, say, for example, I studied a lot of Japanese companies that first started expanding in the US in the 80s and the 90s, and when they became very, very strong at that time, they were sending managers for 5, 6, or 7 years. As an assignment. So the thing is, it takes time to really get to understand a given culture. So that was one mistake they made. The other, I think, was that there needs to be teamwork. And, a number of people have talked about the importance of teamwork in organizations. Now, for a global company, you need teamwork between the headquarters and the subsidiaries. And this, again, there are many reasons why that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I think the cultural barrier is one element that comes into it. And so often what happens is that people in headquarters think they know what they're going to do. And they discount the opinion of the locals in those particular countries or cultures, or don't give it the kind of respect, or at least listen to them
Yeah.
before making any decisions. So you had Amazon that entered China in 2004, exited in 2019. And one of the problems was that many of the managers in that country, they were non-Chinese. So they were all Americans and so on and so forth. And the question is, how well do they really understand the local nuances? Not the only reason for their lack of success, but certainly one factor. And then just very recently, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about the French company LVMH coming to the United States.
Yeah.
And they have changed the entire top management team here, and they brought in all French managers, yes? So, which is understandable to a certain degree, but you really need teamwork. You really need the inputs among different elements of the organization,
Yeah.
so as to succeed.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I would say you need diversity at the top management level. Because if you do have diversity at that level, then you have people with varying backgrounds bringing in different inputs.
Yeah.
And so then that is going to make it more likely that you're going to be able to listen to people with a different background.
Yeah.
Yes? So I think it gives it greater legitimacy. Yes?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you might often have a phenomenon of groupthink. If all the people have the same background.
Yeah, it's interesting when we think about cross-cultural global business. Often we'll think
Yes.
about, a country like India doing business with the US or with Australia.
Sure.
But in recent history here in Australia, Rajesh, we had an organisation that is highly successful here called Bunnings, which has been modelled on, initially that Home Depot style of hardware store that we have in the US.
Right.
And highly successful, been operating since 94, have never missed growing profit and sales. It's just a phenomenal success story. And they purchased a company in the UK called Homebush.
Yeah. Yes.
And fundamentally what they did is that they transplanted the Bunnings model into the UK. Now when we think about the differences in cultural aspects between Australia and the UK, I mean, we were founded from UK stock predominantly from our European settlement. And you would think that there was not a great deal of difference, but to take that model that works so effectively here in Australia into a different market with different climatic conditions, with different people, with different expectations, and it failed miserably. They ended up selling it back to the initial company that they bought it for $1, and they just walked away, and they wiped off billions of dollars of losses. And then I also think about we had one of our major supermarket chains is a chain called Woolworths, and they started their own big box hardware retail box chain in competition with Bunnings.
Yes.
And they teamed up with Lowe's from the US. Now, once again, I had some inside knowledge because I had some people working with Masters, and the Americans that came over that to deliver the project were very much along the lines of, we know best, this product works, the way it works, and without taking into account any of the people they actually had a huge workforce that joined them out of Bunnings, looking for, that green, the grass is greener on that side. But they wouldn't listen to them. So culturally, once again, misaligned. And, I think the Masters experiment, as we call it here in Australia, lasted, maybe 5 years, I think. And then once again, Woolies just cut their losses and closed. So So even between countries like Australia and the US,
Of
there is
course.
a marked cultural difference.
Absolutely. I mean, you had another example of Tesco, the British retailer, which went into the US and they exited because they did not really understand the local buying habits
Yeah,
and and the kind of products people wanted. So, in some sense, you could argue British and America again in a very broad sense, culturally similar. I think there are lots of differences, but in a very broad sense,
yeah,
and yet they failed. So that also speaks to the importance of preparation and due diligence. And I think you cannot prepare enough, and I think that is also very, very critical. And then you need to provide training to the people and the support staff about the cross-cultural issues, about the importance of adaptation, about the kind of conflicts that you might actually face. And so sometimes there will be hard choices to be made, but I think at least you need to be aware of them.
yeah,
And I think what happens is often people run into problems and then they ask themselves the question, what happened? Why did it go so bad? And what could have been done differently?
yeah,
But that is after the fact.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think it is a very important element, I believe, that individuals as well as companies and organizations need to master if they're going to actually succeed globally.
You mentioned diversity in
Yes,
management teams. So
sure.
what would that look like? Is that representative of the community that they're doing business in, or are we talking? So in your eyes, let's dive into
Okay,
diversity.
okay. So I think it's a broad sense. So I mean, I think if you have, for example, a company which is operating, say, in 30, 40, 50 different countries, now you obviously cannot have everyone from different countries. That is true. But certainly you need to have a certain flavor of the different regions. Yes.
Yeah,
So, so that it creates a different culture even within the corporate organization.
yeah,
And then that is going to feed down below. Yes.
yeah,
And then you can also start taking a look at things slightly differently than might have been the case if all of you had the same background.
yeah,
And I don't know what is the case in Australia, but in the US, long, long time ago, and maybe that's still the case, that many CEOs of US companies for a long time did not have any global experience.
yeah,
It was not a requirement.
yeah.
And what about in Australia?
I would say that people are much more aware of the need for
Yes,
developing the cross-cultural skills, and I would imagine
right.
that most of our CEOs of the major corporations are well developed and well versed and well
Okay,
educated with that. And
right.
you know, so but I think it's been a shift, very clearly. I mean, when I would imagine back in the 90s, back in the 80s, as the global business community sort of developed, there would have
Yes,
been very much a case that people were going into other areas or other countries thinking that what works for them in Australia was going to work for
will
them in
work.
Japan or wherever.
Right. And also, I think from the U.S. standpoint, it's understandable for a long time because they were the largest market. They didn't really need to go outside, buy or sell. Certainly not till the 90s when outsourcing and all really became very, very prominent. And after Japan, it was China and to some extent India. But at least till the mid 80s or even till some of the early 90s, it wasn't such a requirement. Now, Europe is very different because European markets are much smaller. And so European companies are obviously, in that sense, at least in the European context, more familiar.
Yeah,
And also, many people there speak multiple languages,
yeah,
you know. So I think they at least within that confines, I think Europeans recognize the importance of adjusting to and overcoming some of the cultural barriers, which was less of a need for the Americans historically.
So when we're looking at something like sales negotiation, I mean, a lot of people still buy out of, China, and they're importing from China. So even from a base of sales negotiation, contract negotiations, what's some tips or advice? What should a leader be looking to do to make sure that those sales negotiations are happening as effectively as possible?
Okay, so I think, you need to develop a negotiating capability within the organization, I would argue.
Yeah.
So yes, you're always going to have certain individuals who may have certain unique skills, like they know Mandarin, they are well versed in Chinese culture and all of this, and that will obviously help you. But I think if China is a very, very important market for the organization concerned, they need to develop that capability in a broad sense. In other words, have a number of people who have that expertise and capability, and you do this through training, through selecting people who have that capability, and just getting a better appreciation and sense in terms of what it takes. Now, I recognize during the COVID times, I think business has been profoundly impacted because a lot of people have been unable to travel and all of this. And so a lot of interactions have probably occurred via Zoom or elsewhere.
Yeah.
But in general, I think in the Asian cultures, relationship building is very important.
Yeah.
How you build, maintain, and sustain relationships. I believe that's critical to any business, but certainly in a cultural context, it takes on much greater importance.
Yeah, I can imagine. So if I'm a leader and I'm looking to develop as a leader of, one of the leaders that I coach, for example, actually manage teams in India, Great Britain, and Australia. So, and ultimately that was thrust upon him in many, many different ways. There wasn't a great deal of company support or company development in relation to him working, across time zones was a big enough challenge, let alone across the cultures. So, so if I'm a leader that's finding myself in that sort of a role, how is it that I can develop those cross-cultural skills to make me truly effective?
Right. So, I think, so two things. One, I think developing these skills will take time. It is not something that actually happens overnight.
Yeah.
And I think because, I think one of the things about culture is that it's not something that we are very consciously aware of, or even of our own culture. And we realize we're an American or an Australian or an Indian when we go outside of that particular country. Yes. And then we are confronted with different ways of doing things, different norms, different mores, and then we realize that something has to change. So I think the first thing is very critical is to just develop that awareness. And beyond that, I think you need to basically do some training. And there are a lot of cross-cultural companies and consultants, that provide coaching and other training programs. And that is the kind of thing that I do as well. And so that is essential. And more broadly, then it's also about changing the mindset. You look at things through a different prism and lens.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, and then there are specific skills, because if you're coming from an individualistic culture like Australia and going to an Asian culture, things will always take much longer.
Yeah.
So you have to be sensitive. You have to have what somebody was saying as strategic patience, which is to say you shouldn't get frustrated if things don't develop in the manner that you expect it to.
Yeah.
And you also need to show resiliency and grit, which is that, you need to persevere. If things are not working out right now, that doesn't mean that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. You just have got to allow for that particular momentum to build.
Yeah.
So I think patience and the ability to just, to not be flummoxed by differences
Yeah.
is, I think, important. So that's why I said it involves changing in your mindset,
Yeah.
because it's really changing how you process information and how you react
Yeah.
to what is being presented to you.
Yeah. It's
know?
wise advice. I was coaching a leader in Indonesia once,
Yes.
Rajesh, and they were talking about a performance issue that they had with one of their team members. And, the way that you deal with performance issues here in Australia
Yes.
is completely different to the way you deal with performance issues in
Sure.
Indonesia. And in fact, the likelihood of ever being sacked or dismissed from a job in Indonesia is highly unlikely because of the way that it's structured and the way that the laws are. And if I had provided the advice that I would have provided to leaders here in Australia, to that particular leader in Indonesia, it would have had a huge detrimental effect, not just on that individual leader, but potentially also on the organisation. So,
Sure,
so that
absolutely.
awareness that we need to have around,
Yes.
local laws, you don't have to be an expert in it, but you need to have an awareness of it, and that ability to say, let's look that up if need be, is also highly regarded, I would imagine, if you're going to do business overseas.
No, absolutely. And one very important factor here, and relating to the situation you were describing, is the importance of face. And that's why you can't get rid of people,
Yeah.
or you can't actually scold them, or you cannot actually directly tell them or give them, feedback, especially negative feedback,
Yeah.
because loss of face is very, very critical in Asian cultures. And so you have to communicate very indirectly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a kind of a skill which it will not develop overnight, And some people might be in a better position based on their personality to be able to adjust to that. Others may have a difficult time. But I think that adaptation is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
That's number one. And then you've got to find out other ways of trying to actually convey the same information in ways that will be perceived as non-threatening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that, I think, is very, very critical. And that's why I said these are skills you develop through experience, through training, through conversations with like-minded people who've had similar experiences. And then, you share your insights.
Yeah. It's very wise words indeed, because global business is certainly not going away. And even though a lot of people are talking about putting walls around countries and bringing manufacturing back to Australia, for
Right.
example, as I'm sure
Yes.
that there's been that movement in America as well, but
Yes.
we're still going to be doing business globally, so it's not going to go away. In fact, it's probably
Right.
more relevant today to negotiate and collaborate effectively globally than what it's ever been.
Right. I mean, there are some tensions, I believe, to globalization right now.
Yeah.
And I think those tensions will remain. But yes, I do agree with you that that in some ways, the global business has spread so much.
Yeah.
It's in fact really hard to retract.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're seeing this even with this current crisis in Ukraine, the global impact it's having, not just in terms of politics, but also just in terms of business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that interdependence will always be there.
Rajesh, who's inspired you in your journey?
Okay, so I would say, I've thought about it. So I think at a political level, I would say, so I would give two examples, one from the political and the other from the business level. So I think at a political level, I would say Mahatma Gandhi, because, I think he was a great leader for India. He had a vision for the country. He was very committed
Yeah.
to what he wanted India to achieve. He walked the talk. He lived like the other people,
Yeah.
which a lot of politicians don't do. But, so I think and he was very dedicated. And he also actually, I think, changed the rules of the game at that point in time. He used nonviolence as a way of trying to achieve his own objectives, used fire. So, I mean, he was an extraordinary person, and he began his career as a lawyer in South Africa, and then came back to India, and then, embarked on this. So, I think his story is very inspiring, I would say.
Yeah.
And, and I think he did many things what you might expect a great leader to actually do.
Yeah.
So on the business side, on the business side, I would say Steve Jobs,
Okay.
because he was a visionary, and he was very committed. He married the design with technology. He also was great in terms of empowering people, and he was just 24/7 committed to what he was doing, and to produce things that would make world a better place.
Yeah.
So he was really committed to actually delivering value, and the focus was on excellence.
Yeah. Excellent. Good. Two great examples. What about your relationship with failure? How do you deal with failure, or how have you dealt with failure in the past?
Right. So I think failure is something which, I think is inevitable, number one.
Yeah.
And so I think we all fail in some respects or the other. I would say personally, of course, failure is not easy. It is at that particular moment, it can appear to be very daunting, and you can feel pretty low, pretty upset. But I think failure also provides you the opportunity to look at things afresh. It allows you to change your horizons, to broaden your perspective, to actually look at things differently. And had I not failed at a particular job at a given point in time, I don't think I would have had the kind of cultural experiences I've had. So, I think which led me to move out of the US for a while and move to, so I've lived in France, Finland, Netherlands, England, Denmark, and New Zealand. So most of the time, England for 6 years,
Yeah.
Denmark for 9, France for 1, Finland for 1. So I have a good understanding of the European and the American environment.
Yeah.
Yes, and I could have been an Australian.
So, Dr. Kumar, what's the vision for you moving forward?
So I think the vision for me is actually to help, to assist organizations in enhancing their cultural capability.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of what I talked about earlier, because I think I see many organizations committing the same kind of mistakes time and time again. And some of them are well-known organizations that should actually be doing things differently. And so I think it's important, to really assist people in terms of reframing, in terms of changing their mindset, in terms of how they look at situations and how they deal with them.
Yeah.
I believe that's very critical, very, very important.
Excellent. So if
And
someone,
so if I can assist them in that regard, I think that would be great.
excellent. So if someone's listening to this and wants to make contact, how can they connect with you?
So they can contact me either through my website or through LinkedIn.
Cool. And I'll make sure that those links are in the show notes. Rajesh,
All right.
thank you so much for your time today, and thank you so much for investing in today's leaders.
Thank you, Tony. Good to be with you, and thank you for inviting me.
And now, it's time for Tony's 2 cents.
Now, it's a matter of reality that we do business across international borders. In fact, as a leader, you may lead team members in another country or from another country. You may be led by a leader from another country, another culture. At the very least, we're seeing more cultural diversity in our leadership teams and in our leadership groups. So it is it's reality today. Diversity of culture has taken huge leaps, and as a leader, it is in your best interest to develop those cross-cultural skills. So whether it's within your organization that's embracing diversity, or whether it's in fact you're doing business internationally, good leaders want to ensure that they're getting engagement right. It's vital to understand the culture and the complexities of any business when we're doing it internationally. So take some of the tips from Dr. Kumar, and it will certainly help you stand out and put you in good stead for both your business and your career growth. As always, thank you to Dr. Kumar for investing in today's leaders, and his links are in the show notes. If you're looking to build better leadership skills, check out the Today's Leader website at todaysleader.com.au. We really are driving a leadership revolution to build tomorrow's best leaders today. Today's Leader is a collective, the mindset to make a difference, the ability to create an impact. Think and Grow Business hosts our Today's Leader Mastermind. Think and Grow Business, where we focus on personal, professional, and business growth. Book your free 30-minute discovery call right from the homepage at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au. Don't forget, wherever you are standing stronger, braver, and wiser. Don't forget the golden rule. Don't be an arsehole. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.